Sometimes, the most luxurious facades conceal the deepest cracks, and when truth decides to surface, it doesn't knock, it crashes through crystal. A veil of golden sunlight fell across the ornate garden, reflecting off crystal chandeliers and the polished marble walkway. Dozens of society's elite arrived in designer dresses and tailored suits, whispering about the luxurious event that promised to be the wedding of the century. Yet beneath the soft strains of a string quartet and the scent of imported white roses, a quiet tension pulsed, like a breath held too long. Among them lingered a sense of intrigue no one could quite place. Everyone knew the groom, Julian Whitmore, a billionaire famed for his relentless ambition. But ambition, some murmured, had turned to desperation. There was a murmur that he was about to marry in great haste. No engagement announcement, no media interview, no time for anyone to object. The swirling rumors were soon to be overshadowed by a far greater shock on this day. Hearts would be shattered and secrets laid bare. Julian Whitmore was a man who believed that every problem in life came with a price tag. At the age of 38, his vast wealth sprawled across continents. He owned high-end hotels in Milan, tech startups in Austin, and shipping lines in South America. Raised in a privileged household in Los Angeles, Julian had grown up observing how money moved mountains and parted seas. He was the son of Douglas Whitmore, a legendary businessman who built an empire with unrelenting work ethic and ruthless deals. Now, with his father gone and the Whitmore empire resting in his hands, Julian's life had become a swirl of board meetings, negotiations, and lavish galas. The glitz of his existence was only matched by the darkness of the secrets he guarded. Though he was still legally married to Isabel Whitmore, a reserved but strong-willed woman who carried herself with the dignified grace of old-world breeding, he was standing at the altar on this very day. With another woman, Serena Klein. Serena Klein was the type of woman people remembered, tall and stunning, with raven black hair and piercing blue eyes. She had an allure that turned heads wherever she went. She had carved her own niche in the fashion industry with a line of haute couture gowns, but she was known just as much for her calculated charm as she was for her beauty. Every gesture was curated, every smile timed. She didn't just walk into a room, she conquered it. Her romance with Julian had begun a year ago, but rumors about their affair had circulated well before that. Some claimed they were first seen together in Paris, months before his wife quietly vanished from the public eye. When Serena stepped into society circles, she'd quickly identified Julian as her golden ticket to everything she had ever dreamed of. For Serena, life was a game of moves, and Julian was the grand prize. Though the Whitmore family circle tried to avert their eyes from scandal, they could not ignore what was coming. They could not ignore the fact that Isabel had been absent from high-profile gatherings for the past several months. Tongues wagged in private corners. Had Isabel truly left Julian? Why was Julian moving so hastily to marry Serena without a divorce settlement in sight? Some said Isabel had slipped away to South America to escape humiliation. Others said she was ill. Julian, for his part, refused to speak about it, simply forging ahead with his new bride. The venue for the wedding was the Whitmore estate in Malibu, a sprawling property that boasted manicured lawns, reflecting pools, and statues commissioned by the greatest sculptors of the modern era. White roses and hydrangeas decorated every corner, a testament to Serena's refined taste. Glistening chandeliers imported from Italy were suspended in the grand ballroom where the reception would follow. The guest list comprised the crème de la crème of society: CEOs, dignitaries, and a few Hollywood stars rumored to be on Serena's brand ambassador payroll. An hour before the ceremony was set to begin, staff hurried to finalize everything. Servers in crisp uniforms carried trays of champagne. The wedding planner, Atticus Montgomery, rushed about, whispering brisk orders into his headset. Julian paced in the side courtyard, an expression hovering between impatience and fear. Beneath that polished, confident surface, a growing anxiety sapped his composure. He had wanted this day to be perfect. He always demanded perfection, but something felt off. His mother, Florence Whitmore, had quietly refused to attend the wedding out of loyalty to Isabel. Instead, she traveled to Geneva to spend time with old friends. Julian didn't expect any of his extended family to show up either. They disapproved of him marrying again while still entangled in so many unanswered questions surrounding his first marriage. But the blow that fate had in store for him would come not from the absence of loved ones, but from the presence of someone he hoped would never show her face again. In the mansion's bridal suite, Serena stood at a mirrored vanity table, adjusting the diamond-encrusted tiara pinned in her hair. Her mother, Lydia Klein, fussed over the lace sleeves of Serena's gown. Painted lips parted in a satisfied smile as Serena pictured the moment she would walk down the aisle. Soon she would no longer be just Serena Klein, but Serena Whitmore, the wife of one of the wealthiest men in the country. Little did she know, a storm was rolling in. A storm that would change everything, shaking the foundations of the Whitmore empire more violently than any business deal or social scandal ever could. The stage was set, each player poised in their place, and the curtain was about to rise on a drama that no one in attendance would ever forget. The sun reached its zenith, sending beams of light through the towering oak trees surrounding the estate. Rows of white chairs were meticulously arranged on the lawn, leading up to an altar adorned with even more white roses and a flowing silk canopy. The setting was perfect, almost too perfect, like a dream too fragile to last. The guests settled into their seats, glancing at the wedding programs emblazoned with Julian and Serena, a flourish of gold script beneath. A string quartet played softly in the background, the gentle melody drifting across the venue. Julian stood near the altar, chatting tersely with his longtime friend and occasional business partner. Matthew Glenn was the one who had introduced Julian to Serena, back when the idea of marriage to another woman still seemed unthinkable. Under normal circumstances, Matthew would have been Julian's best man, but even he was uneasy about the situation, offering only a forced smile when Julian asked for reassurance. His eyes kept flicking toward the guests, as if expecting someone or something to interrupt. "Relax," Julian murmured to himself, though his gaze darted toward the mansion's grand doors. He wondered if Serena was ready, if she had everything she needed, if she was having second thoughts. If he was honest, he was less worried about the ceremony's details and more about the possibility that the media or uninvited guests might show up. He had insisted on tight security, but a sense of foreboding gnawed at him. It wasn't just nerves. It felt like a warning. Next to the altar, Serena's father, Peter Klein, tried to hide his discomfort. Despite his acceptance of Julian's wealth and status, he couldn't pretend to be excited about walking his daughter down the aisle under these circumstances. A scandal hovered over the day like a dark cloud. However, it was no secret that Peter and Lydia Klein had struggled financially for years, and Serena's marriage to Julian offered them the security they had long craved. So Peter smoothed his tie and steeled himself, ready to play his role. He'd sold his doubts for stability, but the weight of that transaction pressed heavy on his conscience. Inside the bridal suite, Serena inhaled deeply, her heart pounding in her chest. A swirl of emotions cascaded through her: triumph, satisfaction, and an undercurrent of anxiety she couldn't quite place. What if everything unraveled now, so close to the finish line? What if Isabel did the one thing Serena had counted on her being too proud to do? She glanced at her reflection in the mirror and forced a confident smile. "Today is my day," she reminded herself. "My future is set." She picked up her cascading bouquet of white orchids, took one last look in the mirror, and signaled for her mother to summon the wedding planner in the foyer. Atticus Montgomery rushed in, flanked by two assistants. His headset buzzed with instructions, but even his polished demeanor couldn't quite hide the nervous flicker in his eyes. "It's time," he announced softly. The bridal party lined up, the flower girl and ring bearer stepping forward with adorable seriousness. A hush fell over the guests outside as the music shifted to the bride's processional. Serena glided out the double doors, her arm tucked delicately into her father's. The sunlight kissed her gown, making the intricate beadings sparkle as though she were wrapped in constellations. Each step felt rehearsed, perfect, and yet too fragile, like the dream could splinter under her heel. A collective murmur of awe rippled through the attendees. Julian straightened his back, letting out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Step by step, Serena moved closer to Julian, their gazes locked, and for a moment it felt as though they were the only two people in the world. But even in that moment, something gnawed at the edge of his awareness, a faint sense that they were not alone in this moment. The officiant, Dr. Nina Farnsworth, a longtime family friend who had officiated many Whitmore weddings, smiled warmly. The ceremony began with traditional vows woven with personal anecdotes that painted a rosy portrait of love. Julian slipped a brilliant diamond ring onto Serena's finger. In that instant, a wave of relief washed over him. He thought, "This is it. Nothing can stop us now." But fate has a way of laughing at certainty. An unmistakable tremor passed through the crowd's hush as a figure appeared at the back of the aisle. Whispers flared. Heads turned. Some stood up, craning their necks for a better view. A wave of confusion and shock rippled through the guests as they recognized the woman stepping forward. Isabel Whitmore, Julian's estranged wife. Her hair was pinned back in a simple chignon, and she wore a dark green silk dress that accentuated her figure. There was no concealing her pregnancy. Though only a few months along, her rounded belly was undeniable. Every inch of her presence demanded attention, not in desperation, but in quiet defiance. The sight of Isabel in that condition caused audible gasps. She walked with calm deliberation, her eyes never leaving Julian. Julian's face went pale. Serena's bouquet trembled in her hands. Even Dr. Farnsworth faltered, her practiced composure vanishing for a split second. Isabel's expression was grave, her hands steady at her sides. She made her way down the aisle as if she were the bride, not Serena. Each step was accompanied by the hush of a crowd that seemed to forget how to breathe. The air itself felt suspended, as if the moment dared not move until she spoke. When Isabel finally reached the altar, she locked eyes with Julian. Her voice was strong, resonating through the tense silence. "I believe," she said, "there's something everyone needs to know before this farce goes any further," she finished. And at that moment, the tension that had been building for months snapped like a rope stretched too taut. The dramatic confrontation that would follow was no longer just a fear in Julian's mind. It was reality, unfolding, unstoppable, and catastrophic. Every single guest felt the gravity of the moment. Wedding or not, this day had just shifted into scandalous territory from which none of them would emerge unchanged. A collective chill descended on the gathering. Gone was the tranquil daydream of a perfect wedding. In its place stood an uncomfortable and startling showdown. Isabel's dignified stance belied the storm in her eyes. She wasn't here to beg or plead. She was here to deliver a blow. Serena's cheeks burned. Her heart thundered against her ribs, and her mind raced with a single question. How dare she come here? At the same time, she felt a flicker of fear. She had orchestrated everything to ensure Isabel stayed out of the picture. Wasn't she supposed to be in South America or whisked away somewhere discreet? Julian swallowed, his throat suddenly parched. He struggled to maintain composure, but every second that Isabel stood there, her pregnancy undeniable, was a reminder of how deeply he had miscalculated. He found his voice at last, his tone carefully guarded. "Isabel," he said, "what are you doing here?" Isabel glanced at Serena, then swept her gaze over the crowd before focusing back on Julian. "I'm here because I have something to say. To you, to her, and to everyone who believes this ceremony is legitimate." Serena tried to reclaim the upper hand. "This ceremony is legitimate," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Julian and I are in love. You walked away from him." "I never walked away," Isabel countered, her eyes flashing. "I left to gather my strength after learning what you two had done behind my back. And I'm here to set the record straight." Dr. Farnsworth cleared her throat as though to step in, but Isabel held up a hand. "Not yet," she said politely, but firmly. "Let the bride and groom have their moment of truth first." Julian's gaze darted around, seeking an escape. The stares of his esteemed guests weighed heavily on him. His heart hammered as he realized there was no grand escape, not this time. Not from this woman, not from the truth. "Whatever you need to say it," he said finally, his voice dipping into a strained baritone. Isabel took a steadying breath. "Julian and I are still legally married," she began. "I never signed any divorce papers, nor was I ever served any. And there's more. This child," she placed a hand on her rounded belly, "is yours, Julian, whether you choose to acknowledge it or not." At that statement, the entire crowd erupted in gasps. A few reporters who had managed to slip through security snapped photos and jotted notes in hushed frenzy. Phones were raised. Screens glowed. The wedding had just turned into a headline. The scandal had arrived, and it was monumental. Serena staggered back a step, the color draining from her face. "She's lying," she hissed. "She's just trying to ruin our day." Isabel's expression hardened. "Believe me, Serena, my intention is not to ruin anything, but I won't allow this deception to continue. Julian, you tried to force me into the shadows as if I were an inconvenience to your new life. But I won't let you deny our marriage or this child." Julian felt the world spin, as if the earth beneath him was ready to swallow him whole. The shame, the panic, the futility of control, it all closed in like a noose. He had counted on Isabel's silence. He had threatened, pleaded, cajoled. He'd used financial and emotional pressure to keep her out of sight and out of mind, but none of that could match the resolve blazing in her eyes. Now the crowd watched with rapt attention. Some guests exchanged mortified glances. Others were riveted by the drama unfolding live. Social media posts were likely already racing across the internet, broadcasting the chaos in real time. The whispers had turned into a symphony of scandal. From behind the last row of seats, Julian's security detail stood uncertain, unsure whether to intervene. In that split second, Isabel turned her attention to Serena. Her voice, though calm, bristled with tension. "You can wear a white dress, hold $1 million bouquet, and even take vows, but that will never change the fact that Julian Whitmore is still my husband." Serena's eyes flickered with rage. "If you'd been the wife he needed, maybe this wouldn't have happened," she snapped. "You think you can just walk in here and—" Before she could finish, Isabel took a decisive step forward, and in one fluid motion raised her hand with the precision of heartbreak, and slapped Julian across the face. The crack echoed across the lawn. Julian stood stunned, a red imprint spreading across his cheek. Time froze. Gasps sucked the air from the atmosphere. It was an act of finality, a punctuation mark on months of simmering betrayal and hidden truths. The crowd collectively gasped. Even Serena looked momentarily shocked. No one had expected Isabel to break her veneer of composure so dramatically. Julian touched his cheek, his eyes widening. He tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. In his entire life, he had never been humiliated like this. Not by a competitor, not by a family member, and certainly not by his own wife. Isabel turned to the gathered guests, her voice trembling with restrained emotion. "You all came here to witness a wedding, but instead I hope you bear witness to this. The truth about a man who would discard his wife and unborn child for the sake of ambition and convenience. This ceremony is a sham, and as for me, I will not be erased." She pivoted, her eyes scanning the aisle. The hush that followed was almost deafening, broken only by the soft notes of the string quartet still playing quietly, as if uncertain whether to continue. Then, with the same calm determination she'd shown upon her arrival, Isabel walked back up the aisle, a swirl of stunned onlookers parting before her. As the final note of the processional died away, every person in attendance understood that the Whitmore family had just been irreversibly fractured. A bride stood abandoned at the altar. A groom was reeling from a public slap, and a wife had left the scene, carrying the future heir to the entire empire. Time seemed to stop in the aftermath of Isabel's exit. Most of the guests remained frozen in their seats, uncertain whether to stay or flee. Serena, her face a mixture of mortification and rage, spun toward Julian. "Well," she hissed, her voice low enough that only he and those closest to the altar could hear. "Do something." Julian took a long, trembling breath. The sting on his cheek refused to fade, both physically and emotionally. He raised a hand to quiet Serena, but she knocked his arm away. "Don't you dare shush me," she hissed again, stepping closer, her teeth clenched in fury. "Your wife, no, your pregnant wife, just humiliated me in front of everyone." With dozens of eyes still on them, Julian kept his composure as best he could. He cleared his throat and addressed the gathering in a voice that quivered despite his efforts. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, I apologize for this disturbance. Perhaps it's best we reconvene inside for a moment and handle matters. The ceremony is temporarily on hold." On hold. Those words sent a murmur through the guests. Some took the cue and began to stand, slipping away from their chairs to mingle in hushed voices, or head toward the lavish ballroom to await further instructions. Meanwhile, Serena stomped down the short flight of steps, disappearing into the mansion with her father and mother trailing behind her. Matthew Glenn approached Julian, placing a sympathetic hand on his friend's shoulder. "You need to get ahead of this," Matthew whispered urgently. "The press will have a field day. This is bigger than just society gossip." Julian's eyes, once so sharp and decisive, looked dull with defeat. "I know," he replied, massaging his temples. I never imagined she'd do something like this. Isabel's always been so submissive." A voice chimed in from behind them. It was Susan Farnsworth, Dr. Farnsworth's sister, and a close acquaintance of the Whitmore family. She shook her head. "Isabel was always too polite and private to make a scene. You must have pushed her too far, Julian." Julian bit back a retort. Deep down, he knew she was right. He had pushed Isabel away. Threats, manipulations, and a total disregard for her feelings had likely built up to this final act of defiance. And now, with an unborn child in the equation, the scandal was monumental. The board of his companies would be horrified. His mother would be devastated. And the already precarious Whitmore reputation risked a catastrophic blow. Dr. Farnsworth stepped in, placing a gentle hand on Julian's arm. Her glasses slipped down her nose a fraction, and she peered at him with concern. "Do you want me to make an announcement? Formally postpone everything and guide the guests to the reception hall?" "Yes, please," Julian croaked, his throat dry. "This is a personal matter. I'll need to speak with Serena in private, possibly even with Isabel if she's still around." Dr. Farnsworth nodded, then made her way toward the microphone stand near the altar, clearing her throat to gather attention. Meanwhile, Julian and Matthew hurried inside, heading toward one of the ornate drawing rooms where Serena had presumably taken refuge. The Whitmore mansion's interior was a blur of marble floors, gilded mirrors, and frantic staff. A flurry of caterers and event planners brushed past them, unsure whether to continue setting up the post-ceremony festivities or to pack up entirely. Atticus Montgomery stood nearby, looking like he was on the verge of tears. The wedding planner looked close to tears. His dream of orchestrating the most glamorous wedding of the decade was unraveling. The champagne hadn't even been served, and already it felt like a crime scene, of reputation, of trust, of future undone. Julian found Serena standing near a grand fireplace, the hem of her wedding gown pulled dramatically around her. Her parents hovered nearby like statues, equally red-faced. When Julian entered, Serena's eyes snapped to him, burning with betrayal and anger. The warmth in her face had vanished, replaced by something colder, sharper. Humiliation turned rage. "How could you not tell me she was pregnant?" she said, her voice trembling. "When you said you still had a few loose ends with Isabel, I never imagined it involved a baby." Julian tried to keep his voice low, but the tension made it impossible. "I didn't know," he nearly shouted in frustration. "She never told me she was carrying my child. Yes, I suspected something, but she disappeared. Every time I tried to contact her." Serena cut him off. "Contact her? You told me you were working on divorce papers?" "That's it? You said there was no possibility of her coming back into your life." Her voice cracked, but she refused to let the tears win. Matthew stepped between them, palms up. "Listen, both of you. Calm down. We need a plan, not an argument." He shot Julian a warning glance. "Do you realize how serious this is? Isabel's pregnant. She's still your legal wife. You can't just marry Serena without finalizing anything. You risk bigamy charges on top of everything else." Peter Klein, Serena's father, rubbed his temples in despair. "The reporters will rip us all apart. This wedding is a public fiasco. Our family name, your family name." Serena spat, directing her fury at her father. "What about me? My career, my reputation, my marriage. That may not even be legal." Her voice rose with every word, like glass cracking under pressure. She looked ready to shatter. Julian closed his eyes for a moment, grappling with the chaos he had created. He wanted to scream, to reverse time, to escape, but the weight of consequence had finally caught up to him. "All right," he said, forcing a measured calm into his voice. "Let's salvage what we can. We'll postpone the ceremony. Tell the guests it was a misunderstanding or a family emergency. Matthew, get our PR firm on the phone immediately. We need an official statement drafted." "About what?" Serena asked, crossing her arms. "You can't just wave your hand and make a pregnant wife disappear." "This is out, Julian. The entire world knows now." Julian's gaze dropped to the floor. Indeed, no amount of money or influence could brush aside a public confrontation at his own wedding. He had built a fortune on controlling narratives, but now the narrative was out of his hands. He felt an urgent need to speak with Isabel. He needed to understand why she'd come back so brazenly now, after all these months. Was she planning to extort him? Did she want a bigger settlement? Or perhaps, was she simply done being cast aside? He raked a hand through his hair, loosening the meticulously styled strands. "Let me think," he said again, his voice hollow. "I need some air. I'll be back." Without waiting for a response, Julian strode out of the drawing room, leaving Serena, Matthew, and the Kleins in an intense silence. He made his way through the mansion to a small courtyard fountain, surrounded by sculpted hedges. The stone cherubs at the fountain's center dribbled water, a mocking lullaby of calm in the midst of the biggest crisis of his life. Julian had built an empire on his cunning and ambition, yet in the realm of personal relationships, it seemed he had no mastery at all. As the sound of hushed conversation and shuffling feet seeped from the house, he closed his eyes. The specter of his unborn child haunted him. Was there a shred of regret within him? Perhaps. But overshadowing it all was the looming question: how would he regain control of this catastrophe? Julian sank onto a wrought iron bench beside the fountain, the gentle burble of water lulling him into a state of reflection. In the quiet of the courtyard, moments from his past paraded through his mind with relentless clarity. He recalled the day he first met Isabel Vander at a charity gala 5 years ago. She wore a shimmering silver gown that accentuated her graceful figure, and she spoke passionately about her philanthropic work with a children's hospital. Julian, jaded by countless socialites who seemed only to chase status, was drawn to Isabel's sincerity. They danced, they laughed, and by the end of the evening, he found himself promising to call her the next day. Their courtship was a whirlwind of romantic dinners in Milan, yacht trips in the Mediterranean, and endless late-night conversations. Isabel was unlike anyone Julian had known, soft-spoken, yet resolute, empathetic, yet unafraid to voice her beliefs. Where Julian saw a deal or a merger, Isabel saw human impact, urging him to use his influence to improve lives, not just line pockets. When he proposed, it was at an intimate dinner at the top of the Eiffel Tower. She said yes, tears glistening in her eyes. In the early years of their marriage, they were happy. They hosted grand parties at the Whitmore estate, traveled the world, and even spoke of starting a family. But as Julian's responsibilities expanded, so did the rift between them. He spent more time in boardrooms than at home. The arguments began, first in whispers, then in late-night shouting matches. She felt he was abandoning his moral compass for profit. He felt she was naive, refusing to see the cutthroat reality of big business. Into this simmering tension stepped Serena Klein. She was bold, ambitious, and unapologetically materialistic, a mirror of Julian in many ways. The first time they met was at an exclusive launch party for her couture line. Their attraction was instantaneous, the electricity of shared ambition, too intense to ignore. They started an affair. Isabel, sensing the distance, tried to reignite their marriage, but Julian was already drifting away. He remembered Isabel confronting him one morning, tears streaming down her face. "I know you're with her," she said simply. "Why, Julian? Why can't you at least talk to me?" His response was cold, laced with denial and dismissal. After that day, Isabel retreated. She rarely smiled. Eventually, she packed a small bag and left for South America, telling him she needed space. Julian allowed it, even supported it financially, believing it was best if she quietly slipped from his life. He never anticipated she would return, certainly not pregnant, and definitely not at his wedding to Serena. But here he was, an empire at stake and a public scandal overshadowing it all. A rustle of footsteps pulled him from his reverie. He opened his eyes to find Matthew Glenn hovering near the hedges, phone in hand. "Julian," Matthew said quietly, "I've reached out to your PR team. They're ready to issue a statement saying the wedding is postponed due to unforeseen personal circumstances. Is that acceptable?" Julian nodded mechanically. "Yes, do that." He paused. "Has anyone seen Isabel?" Matthew shook his head. She drove off in a black town car, the The staff says she took the west exit. You might still catch her if you hurry, or maybe not. She didn't look like she planned on staying. A hollow ache bloomed in Julian's chest. He realized that for all his power, he had no idea how to fix this. So, she's gone, he whispered. And Serena? Fuming, Matthew replied. She's still in the drawing room with her parents. They're insisting on some kind of explanation or plan before more guests start leaving. Julian, we need damage control. You have to pick a direction. Either salvage things with Serena publicly, or figure out how to handle Isabel's revelations. Julian pressed his palms into his eyes, feeling a headache was forming. He weighed his options. Publicly acknowledging Isabel's pregnancy would cause a media circus. Denying her claim would be even worse, if proven. I need a few more minutes, he said, exhaling slowly. Can you keep them calm? Matthew nodded and headed back into the mansion to play mediator. Julian turned his attention back to the fountain. Again, a single memory surfaced. Isabel laughing with him at a charity event, her hand on his arm, her eyes brimming with warmth. It struck him that once upon a time, love had been the reason for everything. But money, power, and appearances had overshadowed that reason, leading him to where he was now, at the brink of losing everything meaningful. The notion that he might be a father shook him to his core. He envisioned a child with Isabel's gentle eyes, or perhaps his stubborn chin. A swirl of emotions, fear, excitement, shame, collided in his chest. If he turned his back on Isabel and this baby, would he ever truly be at peace? And what of Serena, whose own ambitions mirrored his? His world had splintered. Each path forward seemed fraught with peril. A messy divorce, a public scandal, or a custody battle that could drag the Whitmore name through tabloids for years. Despite all the wealth he had, Julian felt a profound sense of powerlessness. He stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. The guests might be dispersing, but the day was far from over. The next steps he took would define the rest of his life, both personally and in the eyes of the world. The question was, would he chase after Isabel to face his responsibilities? Or would he shore up his relationship with Serena in an attempt to preserve the empire he cherished above all else? Julian re-entered the mansion, weaving through the corridors with single-minded purpose. He found Serena in the same drawing room, perched on a velvet settee. Her pristine wedding gown formed a dramatic puddle of white fabric around her. Yet she looked anything but serene. Her parents stood nearby, their expressions tinged with worry and anger. At Julian's entrance, Serena snapped her gaze toward him. The fury in her eyes hadn't diminished. If anything, it had intensified. I was about to go looking for you, she said in a clipped tone. We need to talk. Julian's throat tightened, but he nodded. Yes, we do. Matthew Glenn lingered in the doorway, uncertain whether to stay. Sensing the tension, he quietly slipped out, pulling the doors closed behind him to give them privacy. Peter and Lydia, the Kleins, started to follow, but Serena motioned for them to remain. I'm not going through this alone, she declared, leveling Julian with a glare. Her voice was tight, but her posture screamed defiance. She wouldn't let him corner her into isolation. Not again. Julian cleared his throat. I understand, Serena. I never meant for things to get so complicated. Complicated? She repeated, her voice laced with incredulity. You're still married, and your wife is pregnant with your child. Each word landed like a slap, her disbelief sharpening into fury. Lydia Klein spoke up, her tone icy. Julian, how could you let this wedding proceed if you knew there was a chance your wife would resurface? You've put Serena in an impossible position. Peter Klein stood with his arms crossed. We've respected you, Julian, even through the moral gray areas. But this is beyond a simple misunderstanding. The entire wedding is in shambles. His disappointment felt heavier than anger, and it hit Julian like a cold verdict. Julian raised a hand, an attempt to steady the conversation. I didn't know Isabel would return. She left months ago and cut off communication. I tried to finalize our divorce, but she wouldn't cooperate. My lawyers were working on it. Then, she vanished. I didn't know she was pregnant. Serena's lip trembled, rage flickering into heartbreak. So you were planning to push through a wedding with me while still legally married? Did you think that a piece of paper from the courts was just a formality we could sort out later? Her voice cracked at the end, not from weakness, but from the betrayal boiling over beneath her skin. His gaze dropped to the antique rug beneath his feet. I convinced myself it would be handled discreetly. I never expected Isabel to appear like this. Even as he said it, the words felt hollow. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Outside, the distant hum of confused guests mingling seeped through the mansion's walls. The party was still happening. The music hadn't stopped. But here in this room, time had split open. At last, Serena spoke, her voice wavering. "What are we supposed to do now? My reputation, my business, everything is on the line. I'm labeled as the other woman who tried to steal a married man. Julian, do you realize how vicious the tabloids will be?" Her voice had shifted from rage to panic, the cracks of a woman watching her empire fracture. Julian inhaled slowly, grappling for words that would calm her. "We can manage the press, Serena. We'll issue statements. My PR team is top-notch. They'll spin the story that the wedding was postponed due to a personal emergency, and we can—" Serena cut him off. "And what about Isabel? Do you plan to ignore her pregnancy? Do you plan to deny that her child is yours?" Her voice dropped low, deadly calm. The question struck him like a blow to the gut. His lungs locked. The illusion of control slipped further through his fingers. For all his talk of spin and damage control, the truth was, there was a baby on the way. His baby. He couldn't simply file that under public relations. "No," he admitted softly. "I can't deny that child. If it's mine, I have to do right by it." Peter Klein's scowl deepened. "Then what about Serena? Do you abandon her because your wife is pregnant?" Julian closed his eyes, running a hand through his hair. "I don't have all the answers right now, Peter. This isn't just about one person. It's about all of us." He turned to Serena. "You know how I feel about you." She rose from the settee, towering over him, even in her wedding heels. "Oh, do I?" she snapped. "Because from where I'm standing, the man I love just humiliated me in front of the world by letting his pregnant wife crash our wedding." "Serena," he started, only to be cut off by the sharp squeal of her father's voice. "Enough," Peter said. "This is not the time for sweet talk. We need to consider the legal ramifications. Our families have reputations to uphold." Lydia Klein nodded, her posture stiff with indignation. "Indeed. What's to stop Isabel from seeking a massive settlement or dragging us all into a scandalous paternity suit?" A swirl of emotions churned in Julian's mind. The weight of the Whitmore empire bore down on him. He was used to controlling narratives, forging alliances, and buying loyalty. But this was no business negotiation. This was raw, personal, and intimately intertwined with the core of his identity. He took a step forward and clasped Serena's hands in his. "Listen, I know you feel betrayed and angry. I promise. I'll work this out. We'll handle whatever legal issues arise, but we need to stand together, not tear each other apart." She stared at him, tears threatening to spill from her heavily mascaraed lashes. "I gave up everything to be with you," she whispered. "I pinned all my hopes on you. If you choose her now, if you decide to go back to your wife, what happens to me?" He felt her desperation, and realized that despite her ambition, Serena truly cared for him. "I don't want to lose you," he said, "but I owe it to myself and to that child to at least speak with Isabel, to understand what she wants. If she just wants financial support, I can provide that. Maybe we can still move forward, but it'll take time." Serena withdrew her hands, her expression stoic. "I'm not waiting indefinitely, Julian. I won't be your second choice." She paused. "You have a week, 1 week to make a decision. If you don't, I'll assume you've chosen Isabel and your baby." "A week," Lydia exclaimed. "That's a tight deadline." Serena turned to her mother. "I need to protect myself. I won't be strung along. Not again." Her voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath it. She wasn't making a plea. She was drawing a line in blood. Julian's jaw tensed, but he nodded. "All right, a week. I'll talk to Isabel and figure out how to resolve this. Meanwhile, we'll temporarily relocate you somewhere quiet, away from the paparazzi. My security team can handle that," he continued. Peter and Lydia exchanged wary glances, but Serena simply nodded. Her gaze never left Julian's. It was the look of a woman who had lost faith, but not leverage. "But remember, Julian, this scandal might break us, or it might strengthen us. It all depends on what you choose," Serena declared as she swept from the room. Her exit wasn't theatrical, it was surgical. She left behind the scent of perfume and the sting of unspoken threats. Julian felt the weight of her ultimatum, A single week to decide between the mother of his unborn child and the woman he had pledged to marry. The clock was ticking, and every second brought him closer to a choice that would reshape his life forever. Not just his future, but his very identity. Husband, father, or coward in a tailored suit? 2 days after the ruined wedding, the Whitmore estate was eerily still. Guests had dispersed, the decorators had packed up their floral arrangements, and the media frenzy had mostly shifted to the tabloids and online rumor mills. Every glossy cover bore headlines like "Billionaire Bridegroom Exposed," "Wife Interrupts Wedding, Pregnant Isabel," or something similarly scandalous. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a wildfire. And Julian's name was the dry grass. Julian could barely stand to look at the coverage. He retreated to his study, a room lined with dark mahogany, bookcases filled with leather-bound volumes on business strategy, history, and rare first editions. The drapes were drawn, shutting out the daylight, and a solitary desk lamp illuminated the swirl of paperwork before him. Legal documents, drafted press statements, and a half-finished letter to Isabel. He had tried calling and texting her, but she hadn't responded. She had vanished as quickly as she had appeared. The only tangible clue he had was an address for a townhouse in Manhattan that her lawyer had forwarded, presumably for delivering legal paperwork. Julian wasn't sure if she was actually staying there, but it was his best lead. A gentle knock on the study door startled him out of his brooding. "Come in," he called. His voice cracked slightly. Too long without answers, too much silence echoing back. He then summoned Matthew. Matthew Glenn entered with a concerned expression. Julian asked, "Any word?" Matthew's slumped shoulders suggested Julian already knew the answer. Shaking his head, Matthew replied, "No, she's been avoiding all contact." "Listen," Matthew continued, "I managed to track down an old friend of hers, Marilyn Hares, who used to work with her on some charity committees. Marilyn says Isabel is indeed in New York City, but she isn't certain where." He hesitated. "She's not hiding, Julian. She's protecting herself." Julian rubbed his forehead. "I just need to talk to her. If I can, get her to sit down, to make her see reason. Maybe we can find a path forward that doesn't involve public humiliation." Matthew sighed. "Julian, in her eyes, the public humiliation has already occurred. She came to that wedding to expose you. She's wielding her pregnancy like a shield and a sword." Julian grimaced. "Do you think she wants revenge or money?" "Maybe, or maybe she just wants you to acknowledge her and the baby." "You did push her aside, Julian." A pang of guilt shot through him. He opened his desk drawer and retrieved an ultrasound picture that Isabel's lawyer had included with a brief note. The black and white image was grainy, but there was no mistaking the small shape forming within. "This changes everything," he murmured, staring at the sonogram. "I never wanted children before, but knowing one is on the way, it's overwhelming." Matthew stepped closer. "Do you see a life with Isabel and this baby?" Julian set the picture down and sighed. "We were happy once, but so much has happened. The betrayal, the lies, and there's Serena to consider. If I walk away from her, she'll be devastated and furious. She's threatened to unleash her own set of scandals if I abandon her." "Yes," Matthew agreed. "Serena isn't someone who surrenders easily. She'll either stand by you or make your life miserable." Outside the study window, the winter sky was a bleak gray, matching Julian's mood. He felt cornered, trapped by obligations, public perception, and his own mistakes. "I need to see Isabel in person," he decided. "If she won't answer my calls, I'll go to Manhattan and find her." Matthew nodded. "That might be better. But be careful. The paparazzi are circling, hoping for another scoop." Julian stood, scooping up his coat from a nearby armchair. "I'll take a discreet car, send the security detail after me, but have them keep their distance. If I don't come back by this evening, tell Serena I'm just sorting things out." A flicker of hope lit in Matthew's eyes. "Be honest with her, Julian. She deserves at least that. No matter what happens." Julian left the estate wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his brow in a half-hearted attempt to go incognito in the city. He slipped through the crowded streets with purposeful strides, scanning building numbers, until he arrived at the townhouse. He hesitated on the stoop, his heart pounding against his rib cage. Raising his hand, he pressed the doorbell. He waited, breath misting in the cold air. No response. A second time he rang. Finally, the door opened a crack, and an older woman's face appeared. "Yes, I'm looking for Isabel Whitmore," he said quietly. "Is she here?" The woman's gaze hardened. "And who are you?" "My name is Julian," he said, clearing his throat. "Her husband." She studied him for a moment before opening the door. "Come in," she said, leading him into a small but elegant foyer. "My name is Beth. I'm a friend of Isabel's from her church group." Julian's gaze darted around. The foyer was decorated with tasteful paintings and soft lighting, a far cry from the opulence of his Malibu estate. "Where is she?" he asked. Beth pursed her lips. "She's resting. The pregnancy hasn't been easy on her, especially with all the stress from recent events." Guilt stabbed at him again. "May I see her?" Beth motioned for him to wait and disappeared into a back room. Several minutes passed before Isabel appeared, wearing a flowing sweater that concealed her pregnancy only slightly. She eyed Julian warily. He swallowed. "Isabel?" She said nothing at first, arms folded protectively over her stomach. Finally, she spoke in a voice strained but steady. "What do you want, Julian?" He took a tentative step toward her. "I want to talk. About us. About the baby. About everything that happened at the wedding." She snorted softly. "That wasn't a wedding, Julian. It was a travesty." He nodded, accepting her anger. "You're right. I deserve that slap. And I know I deserve far worse. But I came here to see if we can find a way forward, a way that acknowledges this child without tearing everyone apart." Isabel's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She hesitated, then spoke quietly. "You don't get to walk in and play the negotiator now. You ignored me for months. You threatened me with legal action if I didn't quietly sign divorce papers. And all the while, you were planning a wedding with someone else." His shoulders sagged. "I was stupid, driven by ambition and lust. Maybe I hurt you in ways I never intended." Isabel brushed a tear from her cheek. "You did, and I'll never forget that. But this baby is my future. I won't let anyone, least of all you." Julian reached out carefully, taking her hand. She flinched, but didn't pull away. Even that slight contact felt like a lifeline and a test. "I want to be part of our child's life," he said, voice thick with emotion. Isabel studied him for a moment, searching his face for sincerity. Her eyes, once soft, now held the weight of someone who had learned not to trust too easily. "Then choose," she whispered. "Serena or me, because I won't allow my child to grow up in a circus, where his father is half-dedicated at best." Julian's chest tightened, remembering Serena's ultimatum as well. He had only 5 days left in that one-week countdown. Each day had begun to feel like a noose tightening. He began, but Isabel pulled her hand away. "I'm not demanding an immediate answer. But if you truly care about this baby, show me through your actions, not your words." He nodded slowly, tears burning at the corners of his eyes. He realized that no matter which path he chose, heartbreak loomed. But heartbreak, for once, wasn't what scared him. What scared him was becoming the man who walked away from his own blood. But this was no longer a business deal. It was his life, his child, and the woman he once loved standing before him. For the first time in years, Julian Whitmore felt stripped of his power. Here in this modest townhouse, faced with the reality of his unborn child, he knew that his next steps would define him in ways no corporate merger or social standing ever could. This wasn't about headlines anymore. This was about legacy, the kind that couldn't be measured in dollars. 4 more days passed, each one laden with anxiety and dread. The walls of the Whitmore estate felt less like sanctuary and more like a fortress of silence. Julian spent most of that time at the Whitmore estate, trying to avoid the paparazzi lurking at the gates. He engaged in marathon phone calls with his legal team, attempting to negotiate a quiet settlement that might appease everyone. But still, no solution felt right. Meanwhile, Serena had sequestered herself in a luxury penthouse he provided on the Upper East Side. She refused to see him, though she allowed brief phone calls that typically ended in heated arguments or silent resentment. Every call was a countdown. Every silence, another crack in the facade. She remained firm on her deadline, 1 week from the day of the wedding fiasco. As the clock ticked down, Julian realized that this decision boiled down to more than just love or obligation. It was about the life he wanted to lead and the kind of man he wanted to be. Throughout his life, he had never faced a crisis that required moral conviction over strategic cunning. But now, Cunning was useless without integrity. And for the first time, integrity wasn't a slogan, it was a lifeline. On the seventh day, Julian sat behind the grand desk in his study, hands trembling. The phone rang. He answered it with weary resignation. "Yes, it's me." Serena's voice came through the line, tight, as if she was holding back a torrent of emotions. "It's been a week, Julian," she said. "I need your decision." "Are you coming to me, or going back to her?" He closed his eyes. "Serena," he started softly, "I've given this a lot of thought. I'm sorry I dragged you into this. You deserve better than what I gave you. But Isabel is my wife, and there's a child, my child. I can't turn my back on them." A cold silence settled on the line. Finally she spoke, her voice trembling with anger. "So you've chosen her." "It's not about choosing her in a romantic sense," Julian said, choking on the complexity of his emotions. "It's about doing right by the family I already have. I'm not sure Isabel will ever forgive me, and I'm not sure we can be what we were before, but my child deserves a father, Serena." She let out a bitter laugh, a sound laced with heartbreak. "Your child deserves a father, and I deserved a wedding, a marriage, a future. You've robbed me of that, Julian." He swallowed, feeling powerless to console her. "I can provide for you financially, anything you need." "Money?" she echoed with disgust. "That's all you ever really knew how to give, wasn't it?" "Save your money, Julian. I don't want your charity. But know this, if you think you'll waltz back into polite society with your pregnant wife by your side and no consequences, you're dead wrong. I'm going to tell the world exactly what happened. The Whitmore name will never recover from this scandal." He stared at the polished wood of his desk, feeling the echo of her words settle deep. "Do what you must," he said quietly. "I deserve the fallout." Her voice dropped to a near hiss. "I never thought I'd see the day you'd choose moral duty over ambition. Congratulations on your big revelation." Then she hung up, leaving Julian with the dial tone ringing in his ear. He set the phone aside, exhaling unsteadily. The wave of regret that washed over him was staggering. But beneath it lay a flicker of relief. Relief that he had finally made a choice aligned with something deeper than profit or appearances. For the next hour, he paced through the mansion, ignoring the calls and texts from the outside world. Then, in a burst of determination, he grabbed his coat and stepped outside. He instructed his chauffeur to drive him to the townhouse in Manhattan. Once there, Julian knocked on the door with a new sense of resolve. Beth answered, her expression uncertain, but she stepped aside to let him in. He found Isabel in the living room, seated. She was seated on a couch, a book resting on her lap. At the sight of him, she tensed, eyebrows knitting together in weariness. She had seen his face in headlines, but this was different. This was him, standing in front of her with no audience. Just truth, just consequence. "I made my choice," Julian said, hands trembling. "Serena and we're done. I can't promise we'll fix everything between us, Isabel, but I can promise I'll be here for you. And the baby. Whatever you decide you need from me." She studied his face, searching for any hint of falsehood. He looked older, not in years, but in gravity. At length she spoke. "And what if I choose to divorce you anyway?" Julian nodded slowly. "I'll respect that. But divorce or not, I want to be part of our child's life. I'll provide for you both, do everything I can to be a father." A strangled sob broke from her throat and tears welled in her eyes. She hadn't planned to cry. She had sworn she wouldn't. But grief had a way of ambushing the strong. Why couldn't you see this before? Why did you have to break everything in the pursuit of your own ego? He stepped forward cautiously, sitting on the edge of a chair across from her. "I was blinded by ambition, by the idea that I could have it all, wealth, power, and love on my terms. I was wrong." She brushed away tears. "Actions speak louder than words, Julian. So far your actions have been selfish. If you mean to stay, I need proof you've changed." He nodded, voice solemn. "I understand. I'll give up controlling stakes in some of my projects. Step back from the day-to-day mania of the business world. I'll spend more time here, with you. We can go to counseling if you want. Or if you'd rather I remain in the background, I'll do that too. Just let me prove I can be better." For once, he wasn't making a pitch. He wasn't closing a deal. He was asking for a second chance, with nothing but humility in hand. Isabel looked at him for a long moment, her gaze flickering with a mixture of anger, sadness, and perhaps the faintest glimmer of hope. At last she set aside her book, folded her hands in her lap, and said, "We'll start with the basics. Doctor's appointments, schedules, open communication. If you can manage that, maybe there's a chance." Julian felt a wave of relief, tempered by the realization that this was only the beginning of atonement. "That's all I ask," he said softly. "A chance." She exhaled, placing a hand on her belly. "We'll see. For now, that's enough." Outside, the city hummed with life, unaware of the fragile truce being forged behind these doors. Julian stared at Isabel, his heart pounding with a mixture of guilt and renewed purpose. He knew repairing their relationship, if it was even possible, would take time. But for once in his life, time was something he was willing to devote fully, unselfishly, to another person. The Whitmore empire might never be the same, and the tabloids would have a feast. Serena would likely drag his name through the mud. Let them. Let it all burn, if it meant saving what mattered. But none of that mattered as much as the life he had set out to protect, the life growing within Isabel. This was his second chance, perhaps his last, to be more than just a billionaire with a tainted legacy. It was his chance to be a father. And if fate allowed, a husband worthy of the title. Not because he deserved forgiveness, but because he would earn it, day by day. A tumultuous journey ended with a single choice, one that shattered illusions and paved a new path, built on remorse, humility, and the fragile promise of redemption. The road to reconciliation for Julian and Isabel remains uncertain, riddled with fresh challenges and old wounds still raw. Yet amid the public scandal, broken vows, and shattered trust, the glimmer of hope endures for the sake of the child soon to arrive. For the sake of the man Julian still hoped he could become. Dear friend, life rarely gives us clean endings. Sometimes, it hands us broken pieces and asks us to rebuild, not for perfection, but for growth. Julian's story isn't just about scandal or regret. It's about something much harder, choosing to face the damage you caused and staying present in the aftermath. As the Stoics remind us, it is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. In that quiet living room, stripped of power and pride, Julian chose humility. He didn't win anything that day, but he began something far greater, the work of becoming a better man. Because true redemption isn't declared, it's lived. If this story moved you, we'd love your support. Like this video, share it with someone who might need it today, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful tales that remind us we're all works in progress.